And I'm going to introduce Rachael Carter to you. Rachael and her group at the Mississippi State University Extension Center for Government and Community Development, I've learned to say that, have been such a wonderful partner with Mississippi Main Street. And you know, a big part of the work that we do as coordinating programs is advocate for Main Street around the state with all of the different players. And often one of the hardest things that we have to do in that is to sort of communicate our value in terms of numbers. And Rachael, who is an economist, really understands the numbers and has helped us be able to better communicate the value that Main Street brings to our communities through those economic benefits that y'all all track and report to us. So that's what she's going to be talking about today and sharing some examples of partnerships that we've had together. So let me introduce Rachael Carter. She is an economist with the Center for Government and Community Development at Mississippi State University. She has more than 15 years of experience aiding decision makers and elected officials with economic development, policy analysis, and strategy development. She holds a doctoral degree in forest resources and a bachelor's and master's in agricultural economics. Prior to her current position, she served as the Director of Tourism and Natural Resource Policy for the Stennis Institute of Government. Y'all please welcome Rachael Carter.
Good morning, everybody. I'd like to thank y'all for all being brave enough to get up this early in the morning to talk about math. You know, that's not typically what I want to do this time early in the morning, but thank y'all so much for being here. I would say definitely I'm an advocate for economic prosperity in Mississippi, and so that is why I do what I do. That is why I love my job, and that's why I love Mississippi Main Street program, because I believe the services that a Main Street can provide to a community can give you a good return on your investment over and over again. We're going to talk kind of about today about the economic impacts of Main Street that we're able to discern with the data that we have available, but we're also going to talk about the data that you need to have available. Have I got some folks from maybe Arkansas and Louisiana in here as well? Okay, good. I know the Mississippi folks hear me all the time, so I thought I looked like there was a lot of unfamiliar faces in here. And so I know y'all had a study done in Louisiana, and that was a good study, and I did use that as we kind of did this, but I want to talk to y'all as well about maybe some things you can do to make your studies better, a little more solid, because elected officials in legislatures and Congress, everywhere, elected officials in your local community, they are very used to having people parade economic numbers in front of them. And often they discredit them because they're very used to people parading economic numbers in front of them. And those are the kind of things, and there's also the case of what I consider bad economics. You know, that happens a lot, where you have studies that are crunched out real fast and maybe not a lot of content is put into them, and it's kind of like the it's good enough economics. And so we try not to do the it's good enough economics around here to the best of our ability, but I'm going to kind of show you what we've got and talk about some of these different projects. But very often what you have when you're talking about the economic impacts of community development and economic development even is there's a lot of argument about, okay, well, what do we even need to be measuring? What's important? And a lot of times we don't tell the whole story. And I just wanted to give y'all an example. I used word cloud to make this because I wanted to show all the different towns that are in Main Street. And it only shows part of the story. Like we see the word point up there, but the town is actually West Point. And so those are the kind of things that sometimes happen with economic data, is we're not able to tell the whole story. So we can tell the best story possible, but we're going to talk a little bit more about that. Okay. Just so you kind of know how we did this is Mississippi Main Street has been collecting data in the same format for, I think, since its inception, you know, whenever it started many, many years ago. And the directors have a survey to fill out, and it's very similar, I believe, to the other states' surveys. Do y'all fill out a survey every quarter? Anybody? About what's going on in your community? Okay, well, we used that data from Mississippi, but we felt like the data got a little sketchy when you went back many, many years, because maybe not everybody was collecting it as efficiently as they should have. And so, but we felt pretty confident that 2015 to 2019 that everybody was being pretty consistent and diligent with that to the best of their ability. So we used that data. Then we also used surveys that were sent out virtually just to kind of tell a little bit more of the story, because the data was very simplistic. So we asked some additional questions, and then we also used a survey that was sent out for the National Main Street Center to kind of break down that information a little bit more and apply that to Mississippi. And then we used what's called M-Plan. Has anybody ever heard of M-Plan? M-Plan is an economic software modeling system, and what it has built into it is data from all around the country. Basically, every community has data in M-Plan, and they have what's called multipliers that are built in, and what a multiplier does is it kind of explains how money has changed hands across different sectors of the economy. And so it's already built in for you. You can create your own multiplier if you want to, and I can tell you how if y'all want to do real math this morning, but I didn't figure that you would want to do that. So I'm just going to tell you, M-Plan does a really good job of building in its own multipliers, but you always have to question those and get additional data when you use those kind of systems. And then also we use digital community surveys distributed by Mississippi Main Street, and that is not part of the economic impact study, but that was part of a project that we did with the National Heritage area in response to COVID-19 to kind of help the community see what's really going on, because I will tell you, Mississippi's numbers are absolutely nuts because all the spending patterns changed, but a lot of that is temporary spending patterns, and so some of it's the same, some of it will probably be kind of like snapping a rubber band and it'll go back to the way it was, you know, once, and then some of it's going to stick, but we don't know which because we've never dealt with anything like this before. So a lot of economists have gotten a lot of gray hair this year, me included. We used, first I'm just going to kind of tell you just some descriptive statistics. Descriptive statistics are just exactly what they are. They describe what's going on. It's kind of like taking a camera and taking a quick picture of what you see. And so with Mississippi Main Street, on average, over the 5-year span from 2015 to 2019, the net new businesses that were sustained in each community was about 5. So the net new jobs in each community, the average was about 29, that's pretty good, really. Honestly, whenever we have industry has 29 new jobs, they have a ribbon cutting and a ceremony, and WTVA shows up. So think about that. And then also the population, just the average population of the Main Street towns is about 16,000. We've got a wide spectrum of towns in the Mississippi Main Street system, from having very small populations to having very large populations like a Tupelo or some of our coastal communities. Okay, there we go. We had a few interesting findings from the actual reports that have been filled out over the years that I thought were very, very good, is that there, over that 5-year span, there were 462 facade rehabilitations in our Main Street communities. That's amazing to see that going on. And I'll tell y'all why at the end. And then also we had 346 business expansions. That is incredible as well, because to me, a business expansion is just as important, if not even more important, than getting a new business in, because you have an established business that's probably diversifying their product, they're growing, they're hiring additional people. So I definitely encourage you guys to focus on business retention and expansion in your Main Street programs, because it's a more cost-benefit way of doing business. And then also there were 1,185 net new businesses, and that net new businesses is they had businesses that opened and closed, but what was sustained was 1,185 across the Main Street communities over that 5-year period, which is also a great number. Another thing to think about is that there were 7,456 net new jobs with labor income value of over $294 million. So that's really good too. And so the way we got that number is we took those net new jobs and we took that and plugged that into our economic modeling system to gather the value of that. And I will tell you that was kind of a difficult thing to do, because that we're recording the net new jobs, but what type of jobs are those? And so that's one thing that I feel like you guys probably need to do a better job of, is when you are recording your information from year to year in your communities, you need to describe what kind of jobs there are in the community and keep a record of that. Is it jobs in the retail sector? Is it jobs in the healthcare sector? Are you having law offices opening downtown? And that's very important because the economic benefits of those jobs is different. And I feel like that is one thing that you do. I know I get questioned about it too whenever I'm applying for a grant to help in a retail revitalization or something like that. In government, people kind of look at that and go, oh, well, it's just a retail job. So people don't make much money. And so they don't want to support it. So you need to talk about, okay, well, you're sustaining those retail storefront jobs, and maybe those are not the higher paid salaries, but you've got to also think about the person that owns that business, because it's creating a good economic investment for them. And then they are purchasing supplies from probably other businesses in the community, and so that's helping those business owners as well. So we need to think of some good ways, even if it's just keeping a journal and loading it into an Excel file every year about, okay, you had businesses open, what was the business? You may not want to write the actual name down, but you need to talk about the type of business that it is, because that category really affects the economic impact. And so with this, we actually just had to take what we had, we had these new jobs, and then we used the survey. We sent a survey around to all the directors. Okay, what kind of jobs do you think on average you had? And we had just a percentage breakdown, and we used that to kind of determine what the economic benefits were. And so I'll show you kind of what we found out using those things to apply to it. Okay, just a little bit of an economic lesson here. I want you guys to kind of understand what the economic impact studies provide you information with, is they provide the direct impact information, which that is consumer spending in your community. That's your direct impact. The indirect impact is usually accounted for as well in an economic impact study, which is the purchases made by local businesses. And that is something that can really go up and down. The more those local businesses purchase from additional businesses from within the community, the higher your economic impact is going to be. And when you use that software modeling system, it kind of records that, because it'll say, okay, well, they've got the potential to buy those goods and services here. So anything you can do to increase local purchasing power is great. That's why the local foods industry is a powerful economic driver. If you can have something that's start to finish in your community, then you're going to have a better economic return. The third thing that you need to know that is included in those economic impact studies are induced impacts, and that is the spending of the additional income made by employees or business owners. And that's why I was saying, it's really important when you support those small businesses to think about the jobs of the business owners, because then they turn around and they spend money in the local region, because they have to buy food for their family, they have to buy clothes for their kids. And so that is an economic driver as well. But then you also have to think about, okay, you have a festival that comes to town, and so they're going to have extra staff, and people are going to work longer hours, and they're going to make more money. So those people are going to have more money that they can spend in the community as well. And so those are the induced impacts. So when people start talking about economic impact and fluff numbers and made up numbers and the hoodoo voodoo economics, that's what it is. That's what they're accounting for. Does anybody have any questions about that? Okay. All right, I want to kind of tell you what economic impacts were before I tell you what the economic impacts of Mississippi Main Street communities are. There was the question in the data system that the Main Street managers kept track of, and it was asked, okay, how much money was invested in the Main Street program, how much was public dollars, how much public dollars were invested in your community in the downtown, and we'll talk a little bit about how to make this better later. But according to the data that was provided to us, is there were $253 million invested in Main Street communities from the public sector. And so $148 million of that was spent with construction and revitalization projects. I have no idea what the other money was spent on, and so we probably need to figure out what that was spent on, and I'll elaborate on that some more. But that had a secondary impact of $117.2 million. And so think about that, and that's a great impact, and construction impacts are super easy to measure because we know what construction employees get paid and that kind of thing, but the caveat with that is that when you see those secondary construction impacts, you have to understand that that's a one-time deal. When the project is built, those guys are going back home a lot of times unless they've hired local workers. And so that's just like one project. It's a great economic impact. So when you see on the news, they'll talk about the economic impact of building a steel mill, which is fantastic because my family's in the construction business, so we get super excited about that kind of stuff. But that's one time. That's not the economic impact that's gonna keep going and going and going. That number's gonna reduce over time. The next thing that we need to talk about is the private dollars that were invested. And the thing that I think about this that is so awesome is that the private dollars are way more than the public dollars. So you can definitely say we've got a lot more private investment coming into our Main Street programs than we do government public fund investment. And so there's $639 million of private dollars were invested in Main Street communities. And I want to gather some more data to figure out, okay, well, why, what was that really spent on, and how are we going to use that in the future? But $392 million of that was spent on construction and revitalization. And again, it's real easy to get the economic secondary impacts of that. That was another $301 million. So $904 million in economic impacts of construction and revitalization projects took place in our Main Street communities from 2015 to 2019. And so that had an economic benefit of 5,400 jobs. So those jobs are not necessarily all going to stay because they're in the construction sector. They're going to go to the next project, and the next project doesn't mean they're necessarily going away. They're just going to move around. So as long as we have continued building and revitalization efforts going on. So congrats to Mississippi Main Street, because that's an incredible economic impact. But what I want you guys to take notes on and think about is when you are having money invested in your community in the public sector or the private sector, you need to take some qualitative notes. Every time a project happens, you need to say, okay, we got public money, our community did a TIF bond, and we're building streets with that money. You need to kind of notate what that is. Or if you got a grant, you got public funds, or if you got something from Mississippi Development Authority or Louisiana Development Organization, every year you need to kind of notate where that money came from. You know, was it something that was just allocated from your city? Was it allocated from your county? Describe what that is, because that is really going to help you tell your true story of what's going on. And the same goes for the private investment. You know, is that actually occurring? Is it occurring on your downtown streets, or is it occurring just somewhere in your community? Is it a new hotel? Is it a restaurant? Are you revitalizing the city parks? Because all those things make a big difference when we start trying to figure out how we're going to calculate the actual return on investment, because that is what's really going to gain you support from your local elected officials. Is they want to know, okay, if I put in $100,000, am I going to get $300,000 back? And right now we just don't have enough data to justify and say. We can show some correlation and show that yes, we think you're getting, you know, 1,000% return on your investment, which is what it looks like at a glance, over 1,000% return on your investment. But we can't, as scientists, say that at this point, because it's just not, we just don't have enough legitimate data. I love how the microphone picks up every time I click. Sound effects. Okay, this is just a graphical description of the public and private dollars invested in the Mississippi Main Street communities. And I do want you to kind of see that consistently the private investment is much higher than the public investment. And so that's really good, but we need to kind of start saying, okay, when public dollars were invested in maybe 2016, what was happening with the private sector in 2018 following that. So we can kind of start seeing, okay, is the public investment leading to private investment? Because my gut tells me it is, but I can't tell anybody that for sure because we don't have enough data. Okay, here's just a little bit of a breakdown of the types of jobs that we are estimating that you're creating in your community. Really the top sectors were retail, service and restaurant, manufacturing, healthcare, and then professional services. And 38% is retail jobs for the most part. Service was 24%, manufacturing was 13%, healthcare 17%, and 8% is other, which would probably be the law offices and the clerical type businesses that are sometimes downtown. Does anybody have any thoughts on that? Does that look about right for your communities? What we did was we surveyed our Main Street directors and asked them to select percentages, and then we also looked at a survey from the National Main Street Center where they had surveyed Main Street directors and managers all across the country asking that question, and then we just applied that to the Mississippi data to kind of get that. And so That's one thing I would love for y'all to do. I know y'all don't want to spend a ton of time filling out forms. On goodness knows I hate forms as much as anybody else, but keeping a little bit of track record, keeping records on the types of jobs in your community is really going to help you in the long run justify what you're doing. Okay, and as I mentioned, we use the national Main Street data to kind of break it down further because retail can be a very diverse sector because there's all kinds of retail jobs, and most of those were falling into the food sector according to the surveys that we sent out. Grocery, there weren't a lot of groceries in the downtown. Non-food retail was another one that was a high number of the jobs. Lower was healthcare and nonprofits and accommodations, which makes sense because a lot of times when you have hotels and communities, they're not always in the downtown. You know, your La Quintas and stuff like that are probably going to be on the bypass like they are here or close to the chain restaurants. But anyway, just something to kind of think about to see how that's broken down. Does anybody have any more questions before I move on? In the back, yes, sir?
Is government under other?
Possibly. I don't know. Whatever anybody thought fell into other, but I don't know anywhere else it would fall. Okay, we've run some initial studies, and this is one of those things that we're going to try to gather more data on and see if we can actually document this, but I just kind of wanted to show you that we do have a positive correlation between facade rehabilitations and business sustainability in your downtowns. So when you run the different models, you're seeing that it's a positive flow. It's not actual direct, you know, every facade rehab doesn't result in new business sustainability, but there is positive correlation. So, but we can't say there's a term in science, you can't say the correlation means that doesn't prove causality. We haven't proven causality yet because we just don't have enough data at this point. So we're gonna be working on that over the next couple of years, but there is positive correlation between community revitalization efforts and beautification and business sustainability. So I think that's a good positive, at least it's a first step. Okay, this is something that I think is incredibly important for you guys to think about and notice, is we gave you some quantifiable numbers to kind of talk about the value of your volunteers, because if the Main Street organizations were not there, the events wouldn't take place, and the volunteers would not volunteer. So, because you guys serve as kind of the catalyst to make sure those things happen and those things take place. And so we just plugged in basically what you would have to pay volunteers. You know, in today's society, you'd have to pay them probably anywhere from $8 to $15 an hour if they weren't volunteering your time, if you want somebody to run a festival or do some of the programs and events that you guys do. And so your value of volunteers typically is ranging from the number of hours that they put in, anywhere from, I would say, about $300,000 to $800,000 a year. So that's a huge economic benefit right there, is you're contributing that back to your local economy. So just kind of keep that in mind. Another thing that I want to talk to you guys about is your festivals and events. I do a lot of economic impact studies of festival and events. I have for many years. A lot of them are very, very good. Not every event gives you the return on the investment that you want. But it's just very often that those events just need to be tweaked and managed so that they're giving you what you need for your community. And the best thing that I can say for that is have a clear idea of what you want your event to achieve economically before you even start planning the event, because that's going to help you do those things. The smaller communities are not going to have as big of an economic benefit from a festival and event as a bigger community, just because there's not as many places for people to spend money. So when you do events in small towns, you have to be very strategic, you know, about how you set those events up. But according to the survey and according to the data from Mississippi Main Street communities, there were 736 events over that 5-year time period in Mississippi Main Street communities, and the average attendance of those events was about 4,600. Does that sound about right, typically on average to y'all? Does that sound similar to Arkansas and Louisiana? And if y'all are not keeping track of that, you should keep track of how many events that you have and write down how many people you're estimating came to the event. And if you don't know how to estimate that, send me an email at Mississippi State University and we will help you create some methodology to track how many people are coming to your community. Previously studied festivals and events in Mississippi showed the attendance ranging from 1,000 visitors, and I'm sure there's a few that don't have quite that many, with an impact typically of $105,000 to the mid-sized events, where the impact was between $400,000 and $5,000 to the larger events, with the impacts being $3 million to $5 million. And then, of course, we have Peter Anderson that I've studied several times. They're what we call an outlier because their event is way bigger than most other things that take place in Mississippi, and that impact is $21 million. So, and it's amazing what they do in Ocean Springs with their tourism development, but it takes a long time to grow something like that. So, but you can see what many, many years of concentrated efforts can do with that. Okay, that kind of concludes what I had to say about economic impacts of Mississippi Main Street communities. Basically, my summary is that at this point, we can't even come close to telling people how big your economic impact is, because nobody would believe me at this point. Because if you think about just one festival and event has a $21 million economic impact. That's an impact of Mississippi Main Street. So you think about all those different events that have those economic impacts, and then you think about downtown revitalization where the economic impact was over $900 million. Those are all legitimate numbers that we can put on paper and say, yes, we can stand behind this and we know that this is happening. But to keep better track and give you a better report to send to your elected officials or your grant organizations and your nonprofits and your communities, just record some more detail. You know, we'll be happy to develop a form or a survey or something like that if y'all wanted us to do that, or a format or an Excel spreadsheet to kind of help you improve your record keeping so that you have a better story to tell, a more holistic story to tell. So just send us an email, let us know if you need some help with that. The next thing I want to talk about is a project that I've been working on with Thomas Gregory and the wonderful Randy Wilson back there at the back of the room. And we did some projects in 23 towns in Northeast Mississippi. And as part of that, we did a market assessment, and we also did Randy did the strategic planning and created some wonderful action plans for the communities. But the survey was kind of fun because I'm kind of geeky like that, and I wanted to use it as an opportunity to really tell you guys more about what's going on in your communities, especially post-pandemic, because a lot of the data that we get from our Department of Revenue, which is pretty timely, but it's also very generalized. So we get retail data, we get healthcare data. It's not broken down, but then we have what's called ESRI data that's very broken down, but that's 2017 data, and so it's not as timely as we wanted. So we wanted to do some survey work just to kind of tell a little bit more about what's going on currently in the communities. And so we had several thousand people fill out these surveys. It was distributed by the Main Street directors in their local community via Facebook and email, and so we had an amazing response. No professors on campus could believe the response that we got, but I really kind of think it's because everybody was sitting at home playing on their cell phones, and so and they're like, oh, here's an opportunity for me to gripe and complain about what's going on in my town because I'm really upset. So, but they did have a lot of positive things to say as well. But I wanted you to kind of see what is going on. We did 23 towns. But for the purpose of today, because it's going to take me several months to combine all of this data and summarize it, which I am going to do, but it's going to take a while. But I wanted to pull some sample towns, and these were the towns that had really great response rates. They were from various parts of Northeast Mississippi, and they had various population levels. So just think this is not, okay, this is just the bigger towns. It's not. But town 1 had 429 people fill out their survey. Town 2 had 236 people fill out their survey. Town 3 had 299 people fill out their survey, and Town 4 had 294. And so that's really incredibly good responses for the size of the towns that we were looking at. So just to kind of tell you that, so we asked questions on the survey about what types of businesses would you like to see in your downtown. And so I basically left this as an open-ended, what we call a qualitative response question, so people could just write. I mean, they could write a paragraph if they wanted to, and some people did. I mean, some communities, we had 34 pages of data from this real short survey. So the restaurant, I just did a word count. I put it into a system that would count all the different words, and I've just said how many times did people mention the word restaurant. The word restaurant, just from these 4 towns, was mentioned 374 times. That's out of 1,200 people. So over 25% of the people who did this digital survey in these 4 towns would like to see a restaurant. Does that mean they can sustain a restaurant? Maybe, maybe not. But that's just to put that on your radar, is maybe they're unhappy with the restaurants that they have. I'm not sure. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. One of the most popular responses was grocery. 135 people want to see an additional grocery store. I think that this is something to definitely be looked at with caution, because during the pandemic, everybody's in the grocery store. And you're like, my gosh, we don't have enough grocery stores in your town. You probably have enough grocery stores in your town. You may not, but you probably do. So that's something to think about. Another thing is entertainment. 76 people mentioned entertainment just on that one question. And then movies, 85 people mentioned, it was mentioned 85 times. And then clothing was mentioned 152 times, and then 122 times the children or kid. And so I got tickled at that, because I did children thinking children's store, and then I started reading, and everybody was saying, I need something for my kid to do. And so it's like, okay, we need to combine those responses. So that's just to kind of give you a little bit of a snapshot of what the responses were, what people were saying they needed in their community from these 4 different towns. And I will tell you, there are outliers, of course, because every town is different, but a lot of times that question response, after I did this 23 times, I started thinking, okay, I know pretty much what they're gonna say.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
For any of the towns, did you know if they had grocery stores? Because I know a lot of communities don't have them.
That is something that we would have to look at on an individual town. These communities all have grocery stores. So the ones that we pulled for this, but yes, that is a case, because some communities don't have a grocery store, and they do need to get a grocery store back, because we are having those grocery store drives, because I know you've worked with us in Marks, Mississippi, and it's a food desert issue. So if your community doesn't have a grocery store, that might be something to think about. And for those of you that are in other states, these are things that you can do and find out and ask your local community if you feel like you need more information like this. Any more questions about that? Any curiosity? Okay. This kind of follows up. We basically had a matrix question on this survey where we asked people where they're shopping for X, Y, and Z, just to kind of see if that lined up with what our leakage reports from our existing data were telling us. Because, there might have been some gaps. I know we found a $100 million error in some of the existing databases, and so that was kind of made me really glad that we did the surveys, so we kind of line these things up. So one of the questions we wanted to find out is, where are people shopping for goods and services? And you have to remember that people were saying that they wanted a restaurant, in a lot of these towns. In these 4 towns, it ranged 2% to 7% of the people who answered this survey were shopping locally for what they considered sit-down restaurants, upscale dining. So that means 98 to 93% of people were leaving their community for upscale dining. So keep that in mind. Entertainment, 5 to 12% were choosing local options for entertainment. So that means 95% to, I guess, about 87% were leaving their community for entertainment and recreation. Clothing was another one. Typically 1% to 12% were choosing to get their clothing local. Now, we did notice that a lot of times if the communities did have a good base of downtown clothing options, a lot of times that was not the case, and people were staying and shopping local. But I just kind of wanted to show you there was a little bit of a range. Clothing came up a lot because a lot of our communities don't have clothing options, because those type of stores have suffered since we had online sales are so popular. Okay. This is just an example of what many community shopping patterns look like. And this is just one community, but you can't really see the writing very well. But what you'll see is that people are not shopping locally for things like bars and entertainment and upscale dining. But we did notice that we also asked some questions about, how do you feel about your community? And that's something that'll come out in the research probably next year. But we ask people, do you feel like your community is moving forward, or do you feel positive about the future of your community? And the communities that had a higher level, people who felt more positive were more likely to shop locally for those goods and services that they're things that you have to have. People were more likely to shop locally for that if they felt good about their community, but those amenity purchases like entertainment, fancy clothes, a meal out, recreation, those kind of things, a lot of times people were leaving the community. And then also a lot of people were leaving the community for health care. But people, what we did find out, y'all think this is quite interesting, is people will travel for their hairstylist. So so if I see a community where people are not, and they will travel for their hairstylist, or if their hairstylist is local, they are very loyal to that person. So if you have local hairstylists, kind of do a little self-assessment and make sure that they're doing well, and if they're not, what can you do to help them? Because that is something that is a nice economic driver in a community, because those are often locally owned, and what can you do to help that market? So that's just a little tip. Those are all the slides that I have today. I just kind of wanted to give y'all a little sneak peek at what we're working on for next year with our data, and kind of give you a little bit of insight maybe about how you can collect your data better, especially those public funds as well. Like where are those public dollars coming from? So tell the story a little bit better so that you can tell the story to others when you want to get more funding.